25 to 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. LGBTQ youth are extremely overrepresented in the homeless youth population. They're underrepresented in shelters. The reason that LGBTQ youth are underrepresented in shelters is because of issues that have to do with safety, violence. We've known about this issue for a really long time. Why is it that it's 2015 and we still don't have basic anti-homophobia training as mandatory training for every single person that works in the shelter system? Why? Why are we still waiting?
On one hand, I see myself as like no gender, but on the other hand, I see myself as like both. So like I'm in this like agender, gender queer.
I came out as bisexual in like the 7th grade, and like already that wasn't great, and I felt like there was something kind of off when I was in like the 5th grade, that like maybe I wasn't meant to be a girl kind of thing. And I didn't know that you could transition. I didn't know that that was a thing that you could do at all at that age.
I'm non-binary transgender, identifying more in the male spectrum, and I consider myself asexual.
My first attempt at coming out as trans was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and then I made a real effort at it probably about a year and a half ago. I started really trying to advocate for myself and my well-being. I started identifying as like genderqueer and trans kind of quietly, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. So.
My situation is kind of like I could either have like everything, like a really supportive family, like a place to live, all of that if I stayed in the closet, and if I were to pursue transition, then I would lose all of that and I would be homeless, and that has been like a clear reality for me. So it's kind of like get through school and like survive and don't transition, or transition and like lose all of that. So I did come out to both my parents, and my mom was like somewhat accepting, and my dad was essentially like, if you were to transition, we would not support you in any way ever, and like would never talk to you again. So like it was like pretty like clearly defined in his statement, and again, like I'm not sure if that was just his initial reaction. I'm not sure. Everyone's like, oh, like he'll come around, but there's no way to know that.
I've known since I was 3.5 that I'm trans. I grew up in a family that did not like that at all, and paid a price for that. Wasn't acceptable. At 17, I joined the Canadian Armed Forces to get away. I'm telling my daughter that you have to live life honestly. You have to be strong. You have to not let the boys bully you around and tell you you can't play soccer. You can be anything. You can do anything. And I realized I'm telling her all this and bullshitting all the way. Just completely bullshitting. So it came to be an epiphany, and I realized I couldn't do it anymore. So I came out.
I was 14, and we didn't talk a lot about sexual orientation back then. I was, of course, assigned female at birth, so I was living my youth as a girl. Rumor had it that I was a lesbian, and my father got that rumor. And He asked me if I was queer. The word was understood a little bit differently then than it is today. And I said no, because I was fearful. And then my father and I had a fight a few weeks later, as parents and kids are sometimes want to do. And I used my sexual orientation and identity as a weapon. So, I'm going to get you, just so you know I am a queer, I said. I am queer. And my dad walked me to the back door, and he let me put on my shoes and my jacket, and he pushed me out the door. He said, no queer living under my roof. And I was homeless till I was almost 18.
When I got to around like 12 years old-ish, around there, that's when I started using the internets and figuring stuff out. I hid that for like a good another 4 years.
When I came out as trans to my parents, they, it kind of happened by accident. I had a blog online where my mom kind of just found it, and that's where I was blogging about my transition. And she freaked out and kicked me out, and I was kind of bouncing between places, my friends' places, for a little while. I was 17. It was pretty scary because my parents live on like an acreage outside of the town too, so it wasn't within walking distance of the town. I phoned my boss at the time to come and pick me up because it would have taken me like probably 12 hours to walk from where I was into town, kind of thing. And she came and picked me up and just kind of dropped me off in the town, and my mom took my car and my keys, and I just kind of had a backpack full of stuff that I was living out of, and I was still in high school and I had a job. I knew nothing about transitioning. It was just kind of like I accidentally came out to my parents and now I have nowhere to live. And there's a women's shelter in Peace River, but I wasn't comfortable going there, not being a woman. If I had not transitioned, I would have probably jumped off the bridge. I honestly, it sounds harsh, but like it wasn't who I was meant to be. It wasn't what I was comfortable as. And like I tried it for 17 years and it just wasn't good. And so far this is good, so.
When I came out, I ended up having to leave my partner of 8 years because that wasn't something that they were able to digest. So when that happened, I came out to my family because I had no other way of explaining to them what had really happened. I lost my job, and that sort of stuff all kind of happened in the same chunk of time. So it was really, I really had to renegotiate what my values were and what I needed from like the people around me in my life. I called my mother on the phone and I said, like, you know that I'm queer, and that's how I identify, and we had talked about that before. But I said, I have to tell you, like, this is this other thing that I'm going through, and I don't think my mom took it super great at first. I think she really wanted me to go to a therapist because I think she thought that it was something a therapist could fix, and not necessarily like a legitimate understanding of myself. So it was hard, especially I think for the first little while for my brother as well, because my mom was trying so hard to help him understand, but she didn't have the words or resources, and I know that was super hard for her. So there was a few hard moments and a few fights, but now they seem to be a lot better.
People seek services here for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's that they've been referred from someone else, or a social worker, or a school. Sometimes their parents bring them because they've talked about this struggle or emerging identity, and parents go on the internet and look up, and the Pride Center pops up, and they give us a call, and they come in on their own, or they bring their loved one in. But sometimes the parents just need access to resources. Sometimes people come because they need support, as we provide through the support groups that exist here. We have 3 different specific support groups for trans people, as well as the fact that many of our other support groups are populated by a variety of trans people. So most of our services are trans inclusive. I mean, our youngest trans or gender creative client here is 4 years old. Our oldest would be late 60s.
First thing I heard about when I moved here was the TTIQ group at the Pride Center that I started going to, and I found a lot of support there and a lot of like help in finding like what doctors I was supposed to see and like how to actually transition, because I had no idea.
Well, after pretty much my entire family found out that I was trans, they chose to ignore it big time. Like, I was trying to bring up the conversation with them, like, call me this name, use these pronouns, and they didn't want to talk about it, kind of thing. It probably didn't help that I was only seeing them, like, once a week, because I was in the hospital.
My dad threw a fit. After that point, I was living with my best friend and a roommate for like 2 weeks, but that started like not really working out. I ended up living at a lot of different places when I was down in Medicine Hat. When I was like homeless, I ended up crashing on people's couches, stuff like that, paying rent places and stuff like that.
It was tough trying to get along with administration and people that were like, there was an instance where I went to get in my truck to leave school and I stood up because it was like a lifted truck, and I stood up to go in and somebody walked by and slammed the door on my head between like the door and the side of the truck, and then called me a name and kind of walked away. I didn't get to see who it was, but I got beat up and punched and pushed around and called names and that kind of stuff. So I'm finding I'm relaxing a little bit more about it now that I live in Edmonton. I can go into washrooms without being terrified to use the washroom now, which is great because I've been beat up in a couple of bathrooms too, which is ridiculous. Why is it anybody's business if I'm using the bathroom? But It was hard to find the apartment initially. Everyone here, or the people like my landlord and stuff, don't know that I'm trans. They think I'm female still, but they're pretty old, so I'm just not gonna bother explaining it to them, kind of thing, because yeah, I don't want to cause conflict and like, oh, there's a gay couple in the apartment, like.
Housing in this city is really interesting. Most of the people that I know live in illegal suites or live way past capacity. Right now I'm living in a 3-bedroom apartment with 5 people. I mostly couch surfed as much as I could. I tried to stay really far away from shelters and those sorts of things just because I wasn't sure how I would fare as a trans person in terms of my own rights and being able to be safe. I wasn't sure if there was resource for me at all. Being able to try and keep a job while also not really knowing where you're staying or where you're going, that was really difficult. There's only so much you can do while you sleep on other people's couches and eat other people's like food and stuff. Like I always felt super guilty when I didn't have a place to stay.
Think of the months that I've been out. I spent a winter, part of it on the street, part of it on a bench. I know what it's like to be outside and freezing cold. I can't go to the drop-in center because I'm not safe there. I can't go to women's shelters because they're overflowing already. So where do I have to go? Where? A park bench. And that's where I went. So I sat on a park bench, night after night. Why is it unsafe for me to go to the drop-in center? And if you know it's unsafe for me to go to the drop-in center, why not do something about it? Why not have one room where trans queer folk can go? Just one room. Am I people anymore? Am I even human? Outlink is for trans people, but it's not open 24/7. I mean, if they at least had a chair in an office where I could sit, I could at least be inside somewhere feeling safe instead of freezing my ass off on the bench. There's nowhere to go. Literally nowhere.
One of my experiences in the hospital actually was I wasn't ever allowed roommates. And this was actually really bad for me because when I'm alone, I tend to get more depressed. Like, I really think I could have benefited if I had a roommate. And I wasn't allowed a male roommate because, of course, I have a female body and I'm going to have sex with him. I was not allowed a female roommate because I identify among the male spectrum, so I'm going to have sex with her because obviously I'm straight and I love sex.
I feel judged like all the time. Like, you can't expect to be different and not to be burned in some way. It's kind of something you have to put up with, deal with, like accept. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I take what people think and say about me and I accept it. It's part of who I am, and if they can't handle it, then they're not worth talking to.
We need to show that these kids that they're not alone, because when you feel, everybody wants a herd in life, everybody wants a group, everybody wants to be a part of something. When you find a group that accepts you and is going through the same things as you, then it makes you not alone, and it makes life a little bit easier, and it makes you know that you're okay, and you know this isn't just you going through this. Being a youth, it's hard enough, and especially being a homeless youth, because a lot of them are dealing with trauma, you know, with homelessness, street violence. So, and then try adding in being confused about your sexuality and being beat up because of it. And in our unit, we can see up to 60 kids a day. About 90% of them are homeless. They stay a lot in parking lots, it seems like, that construction's going on at, because they have like tarps kind of boxed in little corners. So I've had a lot of youth stay there. They stay in transit shelters. They just walk around just all night, and then they come here and sleep during the day.
Yeah, the shelter I've been staying at for the past few months, my experience has been kind of mixed basically. Basically, being in the shelter makes me feel, the overwhelming feeling I'm getting usually is uncomfortableness. I feel safe talking with the staff about any problems I'm having, you know, kind of thing. The main bad part is the other youth there. The other kids are just intimidating to me. I am afraid to talk to them, you know, I'm afraid what'll happen. They're confused with me, I can tell. They don't use pronouns around me because they don't know what I am, kind of thing. I just feel very like an outsider, kind of thing.
Some of the kids that were there that I stayed with are not people that I like to remember. Well, one of them assaulted me twice.
Yeah, before I stayed at the shelter I'm staying at now, when I was 15, I tried to access one, but, you know, it was 16 plus, and they kind of weren't willing to work around that, which I understood. And then, I applied to 2 more shelters before I actually applied to the one I'm staying at now. One didn't have vacancy for months. The other, turned me down actually because of my history in the hospital, kind of thing, and because I've been had suicidal ideation. They told me that they couldn't take care of me.
At the time in Medicine Hat, I was I was staying in the streets by choice then, because I was sick of the shelter just being all like, nope, you're a boy. So I didn't, I said, screw that. I will sleep on the streets over going through that. I left Medicine Hat when I was 17.
You came to Edmonton to live with a friend.
Yeah, and basically 2 weeks go by, and he basically like assaults me and leaves me in a field. I ended up staying for a month, which is another place where they basically said, fuck your identity. When I first got there, I was 17 at the time. I told them that I'm transgender, and they said, well, unless you have surgery down there, you have to stay with males. And I remember it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks into my stay there. I overheard this. I wasn't in the room, I was like in the next room, but he said something like, I'm not gonna let him sleep with them. And I'm all like, what? Are you acting like I'm some kind of freak? What do you think, I'm gonna rape all of them? Is that your train of thought here? I don't know, I just felt like I was being denied things that I worked for. I was on hormones at the time too, but it's not good enough.
I'm struggling right now with getting a job, partially because I'm trans and I know people, that's a really common thing in the trans community is trouble finding a job, but also because my parents, and this is a thing that I've noticed happens a lot, and it's a problem with the law. Everyone has told me that when I turn 16, I can move out. My parents don't have to look after me anymore, but they can also kind of choose to not look after me. But also at 16, I don't have the legal right to any of my identification. I don't have the legal right, apparently, from the social services and lawyers and stuff that I've talked to. I don't have the right to my SIN number, my birth certificate, my driver's license, if I had one, passport, things like that. Because my parents have it. And if they have it, then they're not allowed to, then they can choose not to give it to me, which is what my parents are doing. I have my healthcare card, but I can't go to see anything but an emergency clinic unless I have photo ID. I'm looking for a job so that I can start to support myself kind of thing. I can't get a job without my SIN number, but my parents aren't legally required to give me my SIN number. So they could have, and I'm sure this has happened, kids can be kicked out of their house at 16 and then their parents can also refuse to give them ID. Which I think is a real lapse of the law. And it's been really annoying to me because I know I'm not alone in this having happened.
For starters, we absolutely need an emergency shelter, right? So I think I was talking a little bit about the emergency response and how that shouldn't be our only response, but I do think that the emergency response to homelessness is still quite important, especially for LGBTQ youth who have just been kicked out of the house or forced to leave home, and they need a safe space, a safe bed to sleep in at night. I can't tell you how many young people I've talked to who end up sleeping in the park or sleeping in very dangerous situations, anything just to avoid the shelter system. Okay, so you have a young trans man, but so obviously the shelter worker will say, okay, this is a young trans man, but I don't see a man. I see a female, and so I'm going to designate this person to the female side. How bad can it be? At least you'll have a safe bed. But I think that what they're not understanding is that that's actually not safe at all. There's nothing safe about that. That's transphobia, and transphobia is extremely toxic, and it is violent, and ultimately transphobia leads to suicide. Period. I feel that trans women are often viewed as the aggressors and as putting the other shelter residents as being at risk of danger, whereas trans men are seen as being at risk of being put in danger. Do you know what I mean? So there's like this strange thing that happens when a trans person comes into a shelter. It's almost like, oh, we have to protect this young trans man because he's going to get beat up on the male side. Whereas with the trans woman, it's like, oh no, we need to protect everybody else because she's gonna beat everybody up. That's kind of the mentality within the shelter system. What they don't understand is that trans women are most often the victims of violence, right? They're not the perpetrators of violence, they are actually the victims of violence in almost all of these situations. We absolutely need shelters for LGBTQ people, but it shouldn't be that we have this specialized shelter and that's where all trans people and all LGBTQ people need to go is to that shelter. We need to make the entire shelter system safe, affirming, and accessible for everyone, really, ultimately. And I think that's really what the goal is. That's what we're trying to work towards. But at the same time, we also need specialized spaces just for those, because there's going to be LGBTQ people who may not want to go to a specialized shelter. They may want to just go to any youth shelter, right? So we need to make sure that they're able to do that.
People almost think that, homosexuality or, being queer or trans is like a disease, right? And they're going to catch it. Because people think that way, they're not able to talk about their issues, or they push them to the side or try and be someone who they're not. They'll just be who they need to be to stay safe, in these areas.
Ultimately, what we need to do is we need to change the culture of the shelter system. We need to look at the policies and the standards, right? So if there are policies and standards, like in Toronto, we have the shelter standards. So this is like a booklet that has very clear policies and standards, intake forms, that every shelter is supposed to follow. So at least then we have a more sort of standardized model of care. I think we need to look at education first and foremost, education in the school system and education for families, so that when youth are coming out to their families, the families are educated already, so the response isn't to automatically kick the young person out of the house or make it so unbearable that the young person has to leave.
The Inner City Youth Housing Project works with youth from where they're at when they come to us. So regardless of their past history, regardless of where they're wanting to go in the future, they come to us as they are, and we really work with them from that point to help them achieve the goals that they've set out for themselves. We do that in a number of different ways. So that looks like working with youth from a harm reduction perspective, from a client-centered perspective, from a solution-focused perspective, and really empowering them to make decisions that will positively affect their future. So because we're a transitional type of placement, we'll work with the kids to help achieve their next step. So whether that looks like independent living, whether that's reunification with family, or maybe extended family, or even a safe or supportive adult in their life. I really feel passionate about creating a space like this because I think it's something that is different. I think it's something that is needed. And will really put Edmonton on the map in terms of, that innovative kind of doing things differently that I don't think we've necessarily done in the past.
We've learned through the development and the implementation of the 10-year plan that we can't be prescriptive with how we respond. The adult services or the adult response to homelessness can't be lightened or softened for a youth population or a population of individuals who are maybe fleeing domestic violence or the Aboriginal population. We really need to tailor our response. Young people sometimes do choose homelessness, but they choose homelessness because of safety.
Providing queer youth, trans youth with a space where they know that they will go, be unconditionally accepted, not have to worry about fear or judgment would be extremely important. And I think, as a community provider, I think we all strive to do that. But there's a huge piece of education that needs to be provided. I think one of the things I would really like to see is that it's funded appropriately. I think the mentality for a really long time has been to do more with less.
In terms of services, I would say if it's a transitional housing program, there should be intensive case management. Family reunification I do think is important, but I think oftentimes is also maybe not an option for a lot of LGBTQ youth. But I don't think that we should rule that type of program out. And of course, having staff who understand trans health, because currently there are so few services or so few clinics for trans people to access. So we need more healthcare clinics for trans people. There are so few mental health services for youth experiencing homelessness, and there are really, I would say, close to none for LGBTQ youth. And this is such a critical issue because we know that LGBTQ youth experience higher rates of suicide, mental health concerns. So yeah, I would say that we definitely need more mental health services.
So if a program like this was to move forward, I would just see a home. I see a home with staff, I see a home with support, I see a home with resources, with people who are passionate about working with queer and trans youth. You're going to come to this project because this is something that you want to do. You're not going to come to this project because it's a job. And I really think that you would see in the queer community a huge draw to be involved in this type of program. I mean, all of us who have gone through it have so much to lend and offer, right? And I mean, there's so many successful queer people that, of course, that's a great role model. It feels really overwhelming right now, but I can get there because all of these other people that are involved are also doing that and have gone through this, right, to some extent.
If that young person has the courage to walk into a service provider and they go through the series of questions with them, and the questions include typically the first one being, are you male or female? And I mean, I recognize the impact of that now, but it's something that's overlooked. And if you immediately want to build a relationship with someone and start to earn some respect and trust, I mean, that's a really simple change.
For years now, there's been the safe space stickers and some of those things. I think they do work, but if you have a safe space sticker and you have a youth who approaches you and you're completely clueless, about sexuality or gender, you're not really doing justice to that youth.
I think the things that make it hard for LGBTQ youth to access supports is, firstly, the lack of training from service providers. I've definitely, I volunteer everywhere, and I've, worked in shelters and in, group homes and whatever. I found myself, having to educate a lot of people on gender identity and how a lot of the language they were using was actually erasing people's, identity, which is pretty bad. So obviously, if someone's identity is erased, it's going to be hard for them to access supports. I think the more people are aware and the more service providers set up safer spaces, the easier it's going to be for trans people and queer identified people to access supports.
Right now, more than ever, people are key decision makers are much more open to actually having real dialogue about this issue, whereas before, I would say even 5 years ago, the reaction was very different than it is today. I feel like there was a lot of denial, and people didn't want to have conversations about this issue. I think that people just, the reaction from frontline shelter workers was pretty much always, there are no LGBTQ youth at our shelter, actually, so it's not a problem here. Or if I would speak to, city councillors, or I would try to speak to city councillors, try really hard to get into City of Toronto and speak with key decision makers at the municipal level in Toronto. That was very complicated because I feel that people just didn't understand how serious this issue is. But I think that now, probably in the past 18 months, there's been so much media attention with regards to this issue. And now that it's such a hot topic in the media, it's kind of hard to ignore. And so I feel that in many ways, this is really putting pressure on key decision makers to actually respond to the issue. So yeah, I feel like now for the first time in Canada, we're actually starting to have discussions on a national level about this issue, whereas before there was no dialogue.
The fact that the province is actually looking at youth homelessness, paying attention to the topic, I think is extremely important and also really exciting, because I think it's about time we really look at what we're currently doing and how do we reframe that to really focus on setting kids up for success in adulthood.
You know, I engaged young people throughout the development of the youth plan. As we engaged with them, I'd leave the conversation with, you know, if you could have one thing, what would it be? And oftentimes people would think, well, if you ask a young person that question, it's going to be like grandiose, right? And young people would say, you know, I want a locker with a lock on it where I can put my gear so I can go to an interview and not look like a homeless kid. You know, I want a phone number. I want an address. They want really realistic things. And they want realistic things that should be easy for them to get, but it's really, really challenging.
As cliche as it sounds, I still believe that the youth are our future, right? So whether you're queer youth, whether you're trans youth, whether you're, you know, a straight youth, whoever you may be, those are the people that will be in our places in, you know, 10 years. So if we're not working with them to empower them to make, you know, amazing decisions and good choice and have healthy boundaries and have high confidence and the skills they need to succeed, what are we setting ourselves up for?
Trying to make sure that there is safe short-term housing for trans people specifically, that think about specific needs that the trans community has and the specific hardships or dangers that the trans community faces. Having a safe space and having a higher up or someone with a little bit of power, having advocacy for people, especially young kids that really, really need it. That's super important.
On the outside of those buildings, the staff can't do anything. That's not their property. If somebody wants to beat the shit out of you and like you don't have any friends, I guess it's gonna happen. Having like a specialized LGBTQ shelter would remove that possibility, because people would be going there knowing that it's accepting.
I think it'd be great because like a lot of like the services down here are Christian based, like it's Christian and they don't really think about that. So you don't get a lot of like people you can talk to in case you like there's like spats or disputes between you and another person or something, or if you get raped, or if like there's somebody trying to pick you up and you don't want to get picked up. Like it's all happened before, and it'd be really great if we had supports like set in place to help prevent that or help talk to somebody who's been hurt like that.
An LGBTQ youth shelter would be a good thing. Like, not only are you going to have staff there who are, you know, openly LGBT themselves, so you can go up to like the trans staff and be like, I'm having issues with this problem and you can help me. But, you know, I found that in LGBT only spaces like Camp Firefly or the Pride Center, the best peer-to-peer support is there. The best peer-to-peer support is when you all know that you're not like cisgendered or heterosexual kind of thing. If I know that I was in an LGBT youth shelter, I probably wouldn't isolate myself as much. And, you know, even if some of the kids there do have like drug or gang or sex work involvement, I would still feel a lot more comfortable around them because I know that they have no reason to to hate me randomly. You know, I can sit down and freely talk about like my boyfriend without getting these odd looks and people being like, are you straight or gay kind of thing.
Any sort of resource in this city in terms of a facility or a space for someone that could just come talk to a counselor or peer support, maybe eat a meal, feel comfortable for, you know, half an hour in a day, and talk to other people, either like trying to find a place to sleep or trying to figure out how to pay for their medication. It's just so important that people going through transition and that non-binary identified people as well, non-transitioning people, have access to a place that could provide them even a little bit of stability in a time in their life that could be so frightening and confusing. It's so difficult to go through so much of this stuff and have nothing in terms of a peer support or a safe space. Such a powerful thing to be able to say to kids that not only is your identity valid, but if you have any hardships or if you have any difficult times, that there are people that can help you.
I'd like to see this room open 24/7 with a coffee pot in the corner at the very least. It doesn't have to even be staffed because it's a trans community location. Trans people will come here and feel safe. One security guard on the door or a camera watching what's going on. At least it's somewhere inside, warm, where I can fall to sleep curled up in a chair if need be. Get a house. It can be a run-down house for all I care. Hell, I know the people in the trans community, give them a condemned house, we'll fix it. We'll fix it our bloody selves, turn it into something that's nice. Oh sure, it might be pink. It might be colorful, but it'll be a house that we can call our own, that we can make into something safe.
I don't think we should ever look at it as a starting point. I think we need to look at it as part of a spectrum of services. So not as a beginning of anything or a beginning to an end. I think we need to look at the kinds of services that we need as a much like a lens that sees the whole picture as possible. So my concern about it being a beginning is that it's seen as an end.
I've made some changes recently, and some you may have seen. I've changed my hair and clothing and my medical routine. Some of it's important that I talk to you about, so let me just explain it in case there's any doubt. It really isn't relevant to ask about my sex, and don't ask about my gender, cause believe me, it's complex. But you'll need to know my pronouns, they're he and him and his. And I've changed my name to Jamie, and yes, there'll be a quiz. If I seem a little nervous and I'm staring at my shoes while we're making conversation, here's the truth. It's nothing that you did, and there's nothing you can do. I'm just building up my courage for coming out to you. You know, coming out is never, ever, ever fun. I've told a million people, so you'd think that I'd be done. But now and then I see someone I only rarely see, and coming out is just as awkward every time for me. saying it's been so long for shame. I haven't talked to you since before I changed my name. So, just so you know, I go by Jamie nowadays. And also, FYI, the gender issues weren't a phase. If I seem a little nervous and I'm staring at my shoes while we're making conversation, here's the truth. It's nothing